Hi, hello, good day everyone. My name is Matthew B. Esparago from BSED-MATHEMATICS 3A of Sorsogon State University. And I'm here today to discuss the topic about performance assessment. It's about the concept of what and why of performance assessment. First, let me define what performance assessment is. According to Hayward and others, 1996, performance-based assessment or performance assessment represents a set of strategies for the application of knowledge, skills, work habits through the performance of tasks that are meaningful and engaging to students. Meaning, performance-based assessment can be done through the process of performance of tasks, wherein those sets of strategies can be used for the application of students' knowledge, skills, and work habits. Another definition of performance-based assessment according to O'Malley and Valdez, 1996. It is an alternative assessment that requires the student to construct a response, create a product, or demonstrate application of knowledge in authentic context. Therefore, it says that it's an alternative assessment because we already have a traditional assessment which is the paper and pencil test that measures learning indirectly. However, through performance-based assessment, it measures learning directly because the use of cognitive domains, affective domain, and psychomotor is present here. We let the students apply their knowledge and use their skills. A performance assessment is a better tool for gathering evidence on what the students can do with their knowledge and skill because it's not definitely the usual thing that we do, the traditional assessment, the paper and pencil test that are definitely doesn't cover all the overall learnings of the students because not all the students can showcase their knowledge and skills on a paper and pencil test. However, in a performance assessment, we let the students showcase their knowledge and skills on what they can do and how they will going to do something. And that is the essence of performance assessment. An effective performance assessment allows students to apply knowledge to solve a problem or to demonstrate a skill, and that work is assessed using our observation and judgment, and often using a tool like rubric, checklist, and holistic scoring. And now let's talk about why of performance assessment. First, because it helps the students conceptualize what their knowledge and skills should look like. Because we have a criteria, we have a rubric, we have a set of strategies that teachers and students follow, and by that, we will be having a predetermined outcome. Second, it's an active. Students have to do, make, say, or write something. It's an active process because it's not typically the traditional assessment, the paper and pencil test that we measures the learning of the student indirectly. Because on traditional assessment, it doesn't cover the overall learning, the overall knowledge and skills of the students. But here on performance assessment, it says that it is an active process because we let the student do, we let the student make, say, or write something. The third one, assessment of complex standard. A performance assessment helps us to digest complex standards and make it holistic and analytic. And for the fourth one, we have rubrics for evaluating performance on a task. We says that a rubric, a criteria, and holistic scoring is the best way to make and have a predetermined outcome of the students. And lastly, why use of performance assessment? It is in order for us to apply and use these 5 domains by our students. The first domain is the communication skills. The second is the psychomotor skills. The third one is the athletic. And the fourth one is the concept acquisition. And lastly, the fifth one is the affective skills. It is important that we cover these 5 domains because it covers the overall learning of the students, unlike the traditional assessment or the paper and pencil test that only cover the cognitive domain of the student, wherein it doesn't really measures the overall learning of the student. But definitely, because of having the performance assessment, it allows the students to showcase their knowledge, their skills, their abilities and attitudes. But before I end this discussion, I would like just to add an information. While it is a standard procedure for teacher to assess students' performances, teachers may also wish to allow students to assess them themselves. Permitting students to do this provides them with the opportunity to reflect upon the quality of their work and learn from their successes and failures. Because I believe that it is not only the teacher who will going to assess students' work, but it's also the students who will going to assess them themselves, because they will see whether they are excelling, or they will see whether they are improving, or they have hard time studying, and they will have an idea on what coping mechanism or strategies they will going to use in the next time in order for them to succeed and learn.
So, hello everyone. Good day. I am Grayson Rose Inano from BSED 3A Math. So, the topic that I will going to discuss today is about performance assessment. We will going to identify its meaning and its purpose. So, let's start with a definition or with a meaning. So, based on what I have researched on the internet, there are some various definitions or meaning of a performance test. So, I get some of these. Let's start with the first. It says that performance assessment is a form of testing that requires students to perform a task rather than select an answer from a ready-made list. So it simply says that performance assessment is one of a kind, or it is a kind of testing wherein the student will really perform, or they will going to do actually the instructions or the task that their teacher give to them. Like for example, they will create a product, they will going to discuss a process, or they will going to present their ideas. So it says that rather than select an answer from a ready-made list. So ready-made list is a kind of a traditional way or a traditional assessment wherein the student will going to choose answer from the choices that the teacher already made, and they will going to simply write it on their paper. So that is the traditional way or the traditional approach. Wherein performance assessment, it is not like a traditional way because student will going to perform. Okay, they are not going to just to choose answer. So that is the first meaning of performance assessment. Second, teacher observes and makes judgment about the student's demonstration of a skill, or in creating a product, constructing a response, or making a presentation. So, in performance assessment, the student will going to perform a task, they will going to create a product, they will going to present their ideas. So, on the part of the teacher, they will going to observe what the student do And from that observation they made, they will create their judgment in order to measure the the knowledge, the ability of a certain student. So that is the second definition of performance assessment. Let's go with the third. Performance assessment, also called as alternative or authentic assessment. Why it is called authentic? Because performance assessment is a kind of assessment wherein it measures the knowledge, the ability, or the capability of the students to perform a task and to measure their higher order thinking skills in an authentic way. So that's why it's called alternative or authentic assessment. Performance assessments moves away from traditional paper and pen test, according to Furman 2005. Why? Because as what I said earlier, traditional approach is a paper and pen test wherein the student will going to read the question, and then there are some multiple choices, or either they will going to identify what the problem or what the definition referring to. So while in performance assessment, student will really apply their knowledge in order to create a product, or in order to create a process, or in order to present their ideas. So that is performance assessment. Let's move on to the purpose. Why we need to use performance assessment? What is the purpose in using this kind of assessment? So I have three reasons or three purpose. I cited three purpose of this performance assessment. So let's start with the first. First, it is measure, or the purpose is to measure students' skill, such as the ability to integrate knowledge across disciplines. So integrate knowledge across disciplines, like what I've said, based on what they were going to do, they can integrate what they have learned in some various disciplines. Or, like for example, in the real life situation, they can integrate their skills or their knowledge they have. Next, it contributes to the work of a group. Why? Why it is said to contribute to the work of a group? Because sometimes performance assessment can be a group work. So when the task is a group work, they will going to collaborate with each other. So they can contribute, their knowledge can contribute to the group in order to create, or in order to come up with a process or product. Next, it develop a plan of action when confronted with a new situation. So it is the same on what I said earlier, that performance assessment can measure students' skills on how they will going to adapt or to cope with the problems or with the situations they will going to encounter in the future. Next, it can help students to demonstrate his or her knowledge by creating an answer or products. So, by means of performance assessment, we can help the student to demonstrate or to share or to show what his knowledge, what he or what she had learned in order to create a process or to create a product. So, that is one of the purpose of performance assessment. Next, it can provide impetus for improving instruction. So, by performance assessment, teachers can identify now the skills, the knowledge, the thinking skills of the students. So, from what they have learned or from what they have observed on the student, they will going to, or it can be an advantage to improve the instruction. Next, it increases students' understanding of what they need to know and be able to do. So, performance assessment help students to be aware, or it increases their understanding or awareness on the things that they need to do or they need to know and able to create or to solve. Yeah, to solve a problem, to create a product, to create a process. So that are some of the purpose of performance assessment, and I hope that you learned something from me based on what I have discussed. So thank you for your time. God bless.
Greetings, I'm Kenneth Liwan again. I will be your next presenter. Now, from what we've learned just a minute ago, we know that performance-based assessment is a measure of assessment which is based on authentic tasks such as activities, exercises, or problems. This requires a student to show what they can do. Basically, this allows the learner to apply their knowledge on a particular situation. In this chapter, we will learn the types of performance tasks, mainly process-based and product-based. Remember, it is important to assess a student's learning not only through their outputs or products, but also the processes which the students underwent in order to arrive at these products or outputs. For the reason that, to improve outcomes, we need to know about students' experience along the way. Assessment can help us understand which students learn the best under what conditions, which such knowledge comes the capacity to improve the whole of their learning. Now, what is process-oriented learning competencies? Process-oriented performance-based assessment is concerned with the actual task performance rather than the output or product of the activity. It aims to know what processes a person undergoes when given a task. One example of this is reciting a sonnet by William Shakespeare, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" The objectives of this particular task should be clear. For example, to enable the students to recite a sonnet entitled "Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day" by William Shakespeare. Specifically, recite the sonnet from memory without referring to notes, using appropriate hand and body gestures in delivering the piece, maintain eye contact with the audience while reciting the sonnet, create ambience of the poem through appropriate rising and falling intonations, and lastly, pronouncing the words clearly and with proper diction. There are also two types of competencies, and these are simple and complex. An example of a simple competency would be color a leaf with a grain crayon, while a complex competency would be draw and color a leaf with a grain crayon. The difference between these two is that the level of contribution to the learner's overall understanding on the subject is highly different, and as educators, it is important to consider the task that we are giving to our learners. In designing a task, it is important to have a set of standards. For example, number 1, identifying an activity that would highlight the competencies to be evaluated. Number 2, identifying an activity that would entail more or less the same sets of competencies. Number 3, finding a task that would be interesting and enjoyable for the students. This is important because it allows you to give an activity that can be meaningful to a learner's overall life. In performing such tasks, we need something that can measure the level of performance for the learners. But before we discuss that, why do we need to include level of performance? Number 1, it clears out the expectations of the learners. This allows the learners to create a guide of what they need to do and what they don't need to do. And in doing so, this will clear their expectations whether they did a good job or if they can improve. Number 2, it can be more consistent and objective assessment. Since there is a level of performance assessing, the learners will be easy. And this will result in a more consistent assessment because this will guide the teacher as well in assessing the learner. Number 3, better feedback. Feedback is the most important thing when it comes to assessment, for the reason that this shapes the learner's overall learning experience. This allows the learner to know what they need to improve and what they need and what they are good at. Remember, process performance-based assessment is an actual task performance rather than the product. This requires performance that is taking place in the moment with the teacher's presence. With this, an evaluation tool is needed. The most common evaluation tool is a rubric. There are two types of rubric. This is analytic and holistic rubric. Now, analytic rubric breaks out criteria for distinguishing between levels of performance on each criterion, useful for detailed assessment and feedback. Descriptions are organized in a matrix. Basically, an analytic rubric has two or more criterion and each criterion has its own level of performance. For example, it starts from improvement, fair, then excellent. Now, on the other hand, holistic rubric provides comprehensive descriptions of each level of performance. It is useful for quick and general assessment and feedback. The descriptions may be organized in a column or row. Now, if you're stuck between the two on what you should choose, don't worry, I got you covered. So why should you use analytic rubric? It gives out a diagnostic information to the teacher, it gives formative feedback to the students, and it is easier to link to instruction than holistic rubrics. Good for formative assessment, adaptable for summative assessment, and if you need an overall score for grading, you can combine the scores. But the disadvantage of using an analytic rubric is that it takes more time to make and score. It requires time and effort in making the breakdown criteria. On the other hand, in holistic rubric, scoring is faster. It requires less time, it is good for summative assessment, and the only disadvantage of holistic rubric is that having a single score does not communicate information about what areas to improve. This rubric is also not good for formative assessment, so the question is, how many levels of performance should I include in my rubric? Well, there is no specific number of levels a rubric should or should not process. It will vary on the task and your needs as long as you decide that it is appropriate. Generally, it is better to start with a smaller number of levels of performance for a criterion and then expand when necessary. We also need to be aware of the essential parts of a rubric so that when we make one, we know where to put its corresponding parts. Let's now go to the other type, which is product-based. Now, what is it? Product-oriented assessment is a kind of assessment wherein the assessor views and scores the final product made and not on the actual performance of making that product. It is concerned on the product alone and not on the process. It is more concerned to the outcomes or the performance of the learner. It also focuses on achievement of the learner. Now, the learning competencies associated with products or outputs are linked with an assessment with three levels of performance manifested by the product, namely novice or beginner's level, skilled level, and expert level. Now, let's give an example. The desired product is a representation of a cubic prism made out of cardboard in an elementary geometry class. In the beginner's level, the learning competency should possesses the correct dimensions which is 5 by 5 by 5, and this is a basic requirement that a teacher wants from the students. In the skilled level, the learning competency should contain is sturdy, made with durable cardboard and properly fastened together, with basic requirement added by the durability, which enhances the final product, makes the output on the skilled level. Now, finally, in the expert level, the learning competency should be pleasing to the observer, preferably properly colored for aesthetic purposes, and since the product was enhanced with durability and is added by designs that makes it aesthetically pleasing, makes the output on the expert level. And just like in process-based, the teacher can make use of a rubric which can be holistic or analytic. Remember, there is no right or wrong when it comes to giving out performance tasks. Our main goal should be if it can contribute to the learners and can gain skills that they can develop for a long run. That would be it, and thank you for listening.